You are standing inside a dim municipal counting room where the air smells faintly of ink and stored parchment. Tall windows admit a narrow band of light that falls across open ledgers. A clerk presses his palm flat against the page to steady it as he compares this year's harvest total to the last. The difference is slight, but it is circled in brown ink. Around you, the system is already responding. Grain yields from surrounding fields are copied into central books. Well depths are checked against carved stone markers. Bread prices from the market are entered line by line. No one speaks of crisis. The city does not wait for empty storehouses. It watches its numbers. The stakes are quiet but real. If reserves are miscounted, winter shortens. If wells are misread, thirst arrives without warning. If prices rise unchecked, order weakens. Survival here depends not on speed but on measurement. In this examination you will observe how medieval cities prepared for shortage before it became visible. You will see how reserves were counted, how water was placed under watch, how markets were stabilized, how rationing was structured, and how records tightened as strain increased. By the end, you will understand how an entire urban system could narrow its margins without raising its voice. If this kind of careful observation helps you think more clearly about the past, consider returning for future studies. A clerk draws a straight line beneath the final grain total and sands the wet ink so it will not smear. Another ledger is pulled closer. Last year's harvest is read aloud in a measured tone. This year's figure follows. The difference is slight, but it is entered again in the margin, this time with a small notation beside it. You begin to understand that shortage does not announce itself with empty streets. It begins as a variation in records, a smaller tithe from the western fields, a delayed cart from the southern road, a market price that rises by a fraction and holds there for several weeks. The city reads these changes long before it feels them. The mechanism is procedural. Harvest reports arrive from surrounding villages and are copied into central books. Monastic stewards submit tallies of stored grain. Market officials record weekly bread prices and compare them to prior entries. Water levels from public wells are measured against carved depth markers and logged beside seasonal averages. Each signal alone is modest. Together, they form a pattern. You remain at the edge of the table as pages turn and columns are compared. Fingers trace numbers downward. A small wax seal is pressed beside a revised entry to confirm it has been reviewed. No one speaks of danger. The work is simply tightened. The city is not reacting. It is observing, and in observing, it begins to prepare. A clerk smooths a fresh sheet of parchment across a wooden table and aligns it with the previous year's ledger. The new harvest totals have arrived from surrounding villages. Each village submits its figures through a reeve or steward who records acreage planted, acreage harvested, and total yield measured in bushels or sacks. Those numbers are copied into the city's central book. You watch as this year's grain total is written beside last year's. The difference is not dramatic. It is smaller by a measured percentage. That small percentage is what draws attention. Shortage begins as deviation. The city's first task is not distribution or rationing. It is a comparison. Harvest yields are placed against prior years and against rolling averages when records exist across multiple decades. A single low harvest does not trigger response. 2 consecutive reductions begin to form a pattern. Clerks annotate margins with notes about rainfall levels, frost dates, and reports of blight from particular fields. Agricultural information flows inward long before food flows outward. At another table, market officials compile weekly bread prices. Standard loaves are weighed and recorded against regulated measures. The price of grain per sack is noted across several weeks. When grain prices rise while weight remains constant, purchasing power shifts. When weight decreases while price remains steady, adulteration or quiet rationing may already be occurring. These entries are reviewed in sequence. Minor upward adjustments are circled. The circle does not indicate alarm. It marks correlation. Water measurements enter the same system. Public wells are lowered with marked ropes. The distance from rope handle to water surface is compared with stone notches carved at seasonal norms. Each reading is dated and entered into a ledger dedicated to municipal infrastructure. Cistern inspection notes include sediment depth, clarity, and signs of contamination. Aqueduct flow is observed at intake points and compared to normal volume. Water scarcity does not wait for dry wells. It is detected in gradual reduction of depth or pressure. Temple and monastery treasuries submit tithe volumes. Tithes function as indirect agricultural indicators. When offerings of grain decline, rural production has shifted. These numbers supplement harvest reports and sometimes correct them when local lords understate losses to protect tax status. By comparing tithe intake with declared harvest yield, municipal officials gain a cross-check against misreporting. The mechanism is cumulative. No single signal determines policy. Instead, each signal is entered into a layered record system. Grain yield, tithe intake, bread price, well depth, and water clarity are placed in parallel columns. When several move in the same direction, a trend emerges. The city reads this trend before it is visible in markets or households. Storage reports also contribute early signals. Warehouse keepers submit spoilage percentages. If moisture levels in stored grain rise due to humidity or poor ventilation, losses increase. A higher spoilage rate effectively reduces usable reserves even if harvest totals remain stable. These percentages are tracked alongside total sack count. A modest harvest combined with higher spoilage accelerates strain. Trade routes provide another input. Gate records log the number of grain carts entering and leaving city boundaries. Reduced inbound traffic may reflect regional shortages. Increased outbound sales during a lower harvest year indicate risk of over-export. Customs officials compare trade volume to internal reserve levels. When export continues at normal pace during declining yield, adjustment may be required. The system truth is that preparedness begins in arithmetic. Medieval cities rely on documentation as a stabilizing instrument. The act of copying numbers from scattered sources into a single administrative book creates awareness. Awareness allows calibration. Calibration prevents sudden shock. Within this counting room, pages are turned in sequence. Prior years are consulted. Margins accumulate annotations. The ledger becomes an early warning device. It does not predict famine with certainty, but it defines margin. If reserves currently stored equal 12 months of consumption and harvest has declined by 10%, the city calculates new endurance capacity. These calculations are not theoretical. They shape subsequent inspection schedules and monitoring frequency. Officials also evaluate demographic indicators. Birth and death registers maintained by parishes show population trends. A rising population during a declining harvest reduces per capita supply. Migration into the city increases pressure on reserves. When population and yield move in opposite directions, margin narrows more quickly. Climate observations supplement numerical entries. Records of frost timing, heavy rains, or extended drought are copied into agricultural notes. These environmental observations explain yield shifts and help forecast the following season. If drought persists, officials anticipate continued reduction rather than immediate recovery. At this stage, the city does not intervene publicly. It intensifies observation. Market inspections become more frequent. Water readings are taken at shorter intervals. Storage conditions are reviewed again. The system tightens around its inputs. Preparation begins with disciplined attention to signal flow. You observe how no voice rises. The response is administrative. Columns are added to tables. Additional clerks are assigned to copy reports more quickly. The counting room functions as the city's sensory organ. It converts dispersed data into centralized awareness. From here, subsequent measures will follow, but only after the signals align consistently. Scarcity in this structure is not an event. It is a pattern measured across paper, rope marks, price lists, and tithe tallies. The city prepares by detecting the pattern early and refining its understanding of margin before consumption is constrained. A granary door is unlocked with a key recorded in a municipal register. Inside, sacks are stacked by delivery date. Each stack is marked with chalk indicating month and source village. The first task is verification. Sack counts are compared to ledger entries. Discrepancies are noted immediately. A shortage of even a few sacks signals shrinkage through spoilage, theft, or miscalculation. Reserves are measured not only by quantity but by quality. Inspectors cut open random sacks to examine grain condition. They check for mold, moisture, insect presence, and discoloration. Damp grain is separated for drying. Spoiled grain is recorded as loss and removed from consumption projections. Usable volume is recalculated after subtracting deterioration. Reserve strength depends on edible stock, not nominal totals. Municipal storehouses represent only one layer of supply. Private cellars across the city contain household reserves. Guild regulations often require declaration of stored bulk grain during periods of monitoring. Bakers and millers maintain flour reserves tied to production capacity. Monasteries hold preserved grains, salted meats, and dried legumes in vaulted storage rooms built for long-term stability. Officials request reports from these institutions to build a composite reserve map. The system integrates public and semi-public storage into a broader reserve calculation. Civic granaries may hold emergency supply equivalent to several months of distribution. Monastic holdings add supplementary margin. Private merchant warehouses represent commercial stock that can be requisitioned or purchased under ordinance if needed. Each layer is inventoried separately, then combined into a single reserve assessment. Time conversion becomes central. Total grain weight is translated into consumption days based on average per capita intake. If the city consumes a defined volume of grain weekly, total reserve weight is divided by that rate. The result produces a number of weeks of endurance under normal consumption. This endurance figure is then adjusted for population changes, spoilage rates, and potential trade disruption. Water reserves are surveyed in parallel. Cistern capacity is measured by volume rather than surface depth alone. Inspectors estimate cubic capacity and current fill level. Public fountains draw from reservoirs whose inflow rate is compared to daily withdrawal rate. If inflow declines below withdrawal, the depletion timeline is calculated. Wells, unlike grain, cannot be stockpiled, but water storage infrastructure extends availability between rainfall events. Salted and preserved foods enter reserve calculations. Meat preserved through salting or smoking is inventoried by weight and estimated remaining shelf life. Dried legumes and root vegetables stored in cool cellars are assessed for rot. These foods supplement grain during shortage, reducing dependence on flour. Their presence extends the endurance calculation by diversifying caloric sources. Civic authorities separate daily operational stock from emergency reserves. Daily stock supplies routine market flow. Emergency reserves remain sealed except under ordinance. Inspectors confirm that emergency stores are physically segregated and secured. Mixing them with daily stock reduces clarity and increases risk of premature depletion. Storage infrastructure itself is examined. Ventilation openings are cleared to prevent humidity buildup. Raised flooring prevents ground moisture from entering sacks. Rodent control measures are inspected. Structural integrity of storage buildings is checked to ensure protection from rain infiltration. Reserve strength relies on environmental control as much as quantity. The system truth is that reserves are dynamic. Grain ages, water levels fluctuate, preserved foods lose longevity. Therefore, surveying reserves is not a single audit but an ongoing recalculation. Officials schedule inspections at defined intervals. During periods of signal deviation identified in Section 1, inspection frequency increases. More frequent surveys reduce uncertainty. Trade contracts are reviewed during reserve assessment. Agreements for future grain deliveries are examined to determine reliability. If surrounding regions show similar harvest reductions, expected imports may not arrive. Reserve calculations incorporate risk weighting based on regional reports. A promised shipment from a drought-affected region is discounted in endurance projections. Officials also evaluate milling capacity. Even if grain reserves are adequate, bottlenecks in milling reduce effective distribution. Millers report available grinding capacity, maintenance status of millstones, and labor availability. Reserve assessment therefore includes processing capability. Grain that cannot be milled efficiently reduces practical food supply. Inventory documentation is standardized. Each storage location submits totals using consistent measurement units. Standardization prevents misinterpretation. Officials convert regional measures into municipal standard units for accurate aggregation. Errors in unit conversion can distort reserve estimates and lead to incorrect policy decisions. Emergency scenario modeling occurs during reserve surveys. Officials calculate endurance under normal consumption and under reduced consumption if rationing becomes necessary. A 10% reduction in per capita grain use may extend reserve duration by several weeks. These projections inform potential ration frameworks developed later. You observe that reserve surveying produces a structured map of capacity. Each sack counted, each cistern measured, each cellar reported contributes to a comprehensive understanding of available supply. The map includes location, condition, volume, and accessibility. Accessibility matters because some stores may be distant or politically constrained. No public proclamation follows this survey. The information remains administrative. The counting room updates its endurance figure. The city now understands how long it can sustain itself under present conditions and how quickly it must act if incoming harvest does not improve. Preparation advances through measurement of what already exists. A rope marked with evenly spaced knots is lowered into a public well. The rope descends until it touches the surface. The knot nearest the stone rim is held between two fingers and compared to a carved notch in the well casing. The distance is written into a ledger beside the date. This measurement joins a series that extends back through prior seasons. The change from last month is modest, but it is measurable. Water management during potential shortage is structured around observation of volume, inflow, storage, and withdrawal. Wells provide depth readings, but depth alone does not define supply. Officials also evaluate recharge rate. After heavy rain, depth should recover. If recovery is slower than expected, the aquifer is strained. Multiple wells across different districts are measured to detect localized depletion versus citywide decline. Cisterns function as intermediate storage. Stone lids are lifted and interior walls are inspected for cracks. Sediment accumulation at the base is measured with poles marked in cubits. Excess sediment reduces usable volume. Cleaning schedules are reviewed and adjusted when shortage signals intensify. Cistern capacity is calculated by measuring interior dimensions and estimating current fill percentage. These figures are entered into the same administrative record system used for grain. Aqueduct intake points are inspected upstream. Flow rate is estimated by timing how long it takes to fill a standard vessel of known volume. If flow slows, obstructions or upstream diversion may be responsible. Maintenance crews clear debris from channels and inspect arches for leakage. Loss through leakage reduces effective supply before it reaches the city. Water distribution points are mapped. Public fountains, monastery wells, and guild cisterns each contribute to daily consumption. Officials estimate average daily withdrawal by observing bucket counts at peak hours and by reviewing past seasonal averages. This calculation is not announced publicly, but informs internal planning. Contamination risk increases during low water levels. Inspectors check for proximity of waste pits to well shafts. They examine well linings for cracks that allow surface runoff infiltration. Lower water tables can draw contaminants inward more easily. Protective measures include reinforcing well walls and restricting washing activities near intake points. Access control becomes part of monitoring. Wells may remain open, but officials observe usage patterns. If withdrawal spikes unexpectedly, investigation follows. Spikes may indicate private hoarding of water or increased industrial use. Brewers, dyers, and tanners consume significant volumes. During early strain, authorities may restrict industrial water use to preserve household supply. Rainfall records supplement direct measurement. Clerks maintain logs of precipitation events. Extended dry periods are compared against historical patterns. If drought extends beyond seasonal norms, recovery expectations are adjusted downward. Rainfall data allows anticipation rather than reaction. Water rotation schedules may be quietly implemented in specific districts. Rather than public rationing, officials adjust maintenance timing so that certain fountains undergo cleaning or temporary closure in sequence. This indirectly moderates withdrawal without overt restriction. The goal is to maintain overall system balance while preserving public calm. Monastic complexes often possess independent wells or springs. These are inspected and included in aggregate capacity calculations. In times of shortage, coordination between civic and monastic authorities ensures shared understanding of total available supply. Fragmented knowledge would produce miscalculation. Unified measurement produces accurate endurance projection. Reservoir embankments are examined for structural weakness. Cracks or seepage can reduce stored volume gradually. Maintenance teams reinforce vulnerable points using stone packing and lime mortar. Water infrastructure stability is directly tied to shortage preparation. Loss through neglect shortens margin unnecessarily. Officials calculate per capita water use based on typical household needs for drinking, cooking, and minimal sanitation. Industrial use is estimated separately. By comparing total available volume with projected daily withdrawal, they establish a consumption horizon. If the horizon narrows beyond acceptable margin, further measures are prepared. You observe that water shortage management relies on continuous recalibration. Measurements are repeated at shorter intervals once signal deviation is detected. Instead of monthly readings, wells may be measured weekly. Aqueduct flow timing may be checked daily. Increased measurement frequency reduces uncertainty and allows earlier corrective action. This system integrates physical inspection, numeric calculation, infrastructure maintenance, and administrative record keeping. No dramatic event marks its activation. It operates as an extension of routine oversight intensified by subtle signal shifts identified earlier. Water, unlike grain, cannot be stored indefinitely. Therefore, preservation depends on careful balance between inflow, storage capacity, and withdrawal discipline. The city prepares by understanding its water margin in precise terms. That margin becomes a boundary within which all further planning must operate. A standard weight made of iron is placed on a balance scale. A loaf of bread is set on the opposite pan. The scale arm settles at equilibrium. The loaf meets regulation. The weight itself is compared against a master standard kept under civic seal. If the weight has worn down or been altered, correction is made immediately. Accurate measurement forms the foundation of market stability. Market stabilization during potential shortage centers on three mechanisms: weight enforcement, price oversight, and stock transparency. Officials conduct inspections without spectacle. Bakers' loaves are weighed randomly throughout the market day. Merchants' measures for grain and flour are compared against standardized volume containers. These inspections prevent hidden reduction of quantity that would distort supply signals. Price records from prior weeks are reviewed alongside current listings. When grain price increases beyond expected seasonal fluctuation, officials determine whether the rise reflects legitimate supply reduction or speculative hoarding. Maximum price ordinances, if already established, may be reaffirmed. If none exist, provisional ceilings can be drafted based on average historic price adjusted for documented yield decline. Merchants are required to declare stock levels under oath in some jurisdictions. These declarations are recorded. Discrepancies between declared stock and warehouse inspection results carry penalties. Transparency discourages artificial scarcity created through withholding supply to raise prices. Market supervision increases gradually rather than abruptly. Additional officials are present during trading hours. They observe transaction volume and buyer behavior. Sudden surges in purchasing may indicate fear spreading among households. Early detection allows subtle calming measures such as public posting of current reserve assessments to reassure stability. Bread weight regulation serves a dual purpose. It protects consumers from shrinkage and preserves predictable grain usage. If bread size decreases without official adjustment, consumption may rise unexpectedly as households purchase more units to compensate. Maintaining regulated weight ensures accurate calculation of grain outflow from reserves. Officials also monitor export activity at city gates. Grain leaving the city during potential shortage reduces internal margin. Export restrictions may be quietly applied. These restrictions are based on reserve calculations from Section 2. If endurance projection falls below a predetermined threshold, outbound trade is limited. Guild cooperation plays a stabilizing role. Bakers' guilds receive updated grain allotment projections. Millers coordinate milling rates to prevent backlog or overproduction. Market regulation integrates with production capacity to maintain balanced throughput from storage to consumer. Coin circulation is reviewed in relation to grain pricing. Debasement or shortage of coins can distort apparent price changes. Officials ensure that price increases reflect supply reality rather than currency fluctuation. This requires comparison of metal content in circulating coinage with prior standards. Public communication remains measured. Notices posted in market squares may remind citizens of weight standards and price regulations. These notices do not announce a crisis. They reaffirm order. Visible regulation reassures buyers that the system is functioning. Stock rotation intersects with market stabilization. Older grain moved forward from storage is directed into milling first. This ensures that reserve degradation does not undermine supply mid-crisis. By aligning storage rotation with market flow, officials maintain quality consistency. Inspection records are logged daily. Each enforcement action is entered into a ledger. Patterns of repeated violation by specific merchants are flagged. Consistent enforcement reduces temptation to exploit early shortage signals for profit. You observe that stabilization relies on predictability. When buyers trust that weights are accurate and prices are monitored, panic buying diminishes. The market remains a channel for controlled distribution rather than a site of volatility. Stability extends reserve life indirectly by preventing abrupt consumption spikes. The system functions through measurement, documentation, oversight, and calibrated restriction. No dramatic seizure of goods occurs at this stage. Intervention is administrative and proportional. Market stabilization bridges the gap between reserve calculation and rationing framework, ensuring that normal trade continues within controlled parameters. A revised distribution chart is copied into a municipal ledger. Columns list household size categories, average grain allocation per person, and adjusted allotments under reduced supply conditions. The chart does not announce an emergency. It defines structure. You observe as officials calculate how much flour a family of 4 receives under normal conditions and how that amount shifts if reserves fall below a defined threshold. Rationing begins as planning before it becomes practice. Based on reserve endurance projections established in earlier sections, officials determine trigger points. For example, if total grain reserves fall below a specific number of weeks of supply, per capita distribution reduces by a fixed percentage. These reductions are calculated carefully to extend endurance without causing immediate nutritional collapse. Priority allocation is structured around civic function. Hospitals and infirmaries receive protected quotas because patient survival depends on steady intake. Monasteries operating charitable kitchens are assigned defined amounts to maintain support for the poorest residents. Military garrisons receive consistent supply to preserve order and defense readiness. Bakers receive flour allotments calibrated to serve regulated household needs. Allocation formulas consider demographic records. Parish registers provide approximate population counts by district. Officials estimate household sizes and adjust total flour distributed to each neighborhood. Distribution points are mapped to reduce congestion. Instead of concentrating supply at a single granary, allotments may be delivered to multiple authorized bakers who operate under guild oversight. Ration tokens or written permits are prepared in advance. These tokens correspond to household size and are redeemable for specified quantities. The issuance schedule is staggered to prevent crowding. Each token is marked with a seal or signature recorded in a ledger to prevent duplication. Forgery risk is mitigated by cross-checking token serial entries with distribution logs. Rationing also accounts for occupational demands. Laborers performing heavy work require higher caloric intake. Officials may allow minor adjustments for specific guilds while maintaining overall reduction targets. These adjustments are documented to preserve transparency and prevent perception of favoritism. Fuel consumption intersects with rationing. Bakers adjust oven firing schedules to align with reduced flour allotments. Fewer baking cycles conserve wood while maintaining bread supply continuity. Milling schedules are coordinated to match ration volumes rather than normal market demand. Monitoring compliance is essential. Distribution records are reviewed daily during active rationing. The quantity of flour issued from storage must match the sum of allotments redeemed. Discrepancies prompt investigation. Accurate record keeping preserves trust in the fairness of the system. Water allocation may also be influenced indirectly. If grain is reduced, bread baking frequency changes, altering water use in baking and dough preparation. Industrial users, such as dyers or brewers, may face temporary reductions to preserve water for food preparation and drinking. Officials evaluate nutritional adequacy. Grain ration reduction may be offset by encouraging consumption of legumes, root vegetables, and preserved meats if available. These supplements extend caloric coverage and reduce exclusive reliance on wheat. Substitution planning is integrated but not yet fully implemented, as detailed in later sections. Public order considerations shape ration structure. Clear and predictable distribution reduces anxiety. Announced schedules specify when households may redeem allotments. Guard presence at distribution sites remains calm and procedural rather than confrontational. Reserve projections are recalculated after ration implementation. If reduced distribution extends endurance from 8 weeks to 12, officials track this change. Rationing is not static. It may tighten or relax based on updated harvest reports or incoming trade shipments. You observe that rationing frameworks rely on preparation, documentation, and measured enforcement. They operate as mathematical adjustments to consumption aligned with reserve realities. The objective is continuity, not punishment. By controlling outflow precisely, the city preserves structural stability across institutions and households. Priority allocation ensures that critical services continue functioning. Without protected supply to hospitals and defensive forces, secondary crises could arise. Therefore, rationing is not an equal reduction across all categories. It is a strategic distribution based on civic hierarchy and survival function. The system integrates reserve data, demographic information, occupational requirements, and logistical capacity. Every allotment corresponds to a ledger entry. Every token corresponds to a calculated fraction of remaining stock. Rationing becomes an extension of accounting discipline applied to daily sustenance. A clerk replaces a weekly tally sheet with a daily log. Columns previously updated once every 7 days are now revised at sunset each evening. Grain issued from storage is entered immediately rather than batched. This shift in recording frequency marks transition from observation to active management. During strain, documentation becomes more granular. Each sack removed from storage is logged with date, destination, and authorizing signature. Distribution totals from ration sites are reconciled against storage withdrawals before the day ends. This reduces delay between discrepancy and detection. Double entry comparison strengthens oversight. One ledger records outflow from storage, another records receipt at distribution points. At the end of each day, totals must align. If storage shows 50 sacks issued and distribution logs show only 48 received, 2 sacks require explanation. Immediate investigation prevents cumulative loss. Seal verification procedures intensify. Official wax seals mark authorized documents and storage closures. Seal impressions are compared daily against master stamps to detect tampering. Broken seals are recorded and replaced with a notation explaining the cause. Spoilage logs expand. Instead of periodic spoilage estimates, inspectors record conditions of specific stacks within granaries. If a particular section shows increased moisture damage, that section's grain is prioritized for immediate milling. This prevents unrecorded degradation that would distort reserve calculations. Access logs are maintained at granary entrances. Names of individuals entering storage facilities are recorded with time of entry and purpose. Key custody is documented. Keys are stored in designated boxes when not in use. Transfers of key responsibility are signed and dated. Population registers are updated more frequently. Parish officials submit weekly birth and death counts to adjust per capita distribution calculations. Migration into or out of the city is noted when identifiable. Accurate population figures prevent misallocation of rations. Trade receipts are reconciled with customs records. If inbound grain shipments arrive, quantity and condition are documented immediately. Incoming stock is assigned storage location and integrated into reserve calculations that same day. Delay in recording could lead to misjudged endurance projections. Audit cycles shorten. Instead of monthly reviews of cumulative totals, officials conduct mid-week reconciliations. These reviews check arithmetic accuracy and verify that distribution percentages match planned ration formulas. Errors are corrected before they propagate. Water measurements join the tightened record schedule. Well depths and cistern levels are logged at shorter intervals. Any unexpected fluctuation prompts cross-verification. A sudden drop may indicate leakage or unauthorized withdrawal. Quick documentation allows rapid correction. Market inspection reports are compiled daily. Bread weight compliance rates are tallied. Violations are logged with penalty notation. Consistent documentation builds deterrence and preserves fairness perception. The system truth during strain is that time between action and record shrinks. Shorter intervals increase precision. Precision reduces uncertainty. Uncertainty is the primary risk factor during shortage because it can amplify rumor and miscalculation. Officials centralize records in a single counting room to improve oversight. Fragmented documentation increases error. Consolidation allows cross-reference across grain, water, trade, and distribution logs. Patterns become visible through proximity of data. Ledger format may be adjusted to accommodate additional columns for ration status or reserve threshold indicators. Margins include updated endurance estimates recalculated after each significant stock change. The ledger evolves from passive record into active control instrument. You observe that no raised voices accompany this tightening. The adjustment occurs through ink and arithmetic. Increased documentation does not slow the system, it stabilizes it. Clear records allow administrators to answer questions with numbers rather than conjecture. This record discipline underpins every subsequent mechanism. Without accurate, timely documentation, rationing would drift, reserves would be misjudged, and stabilization would weaken. By tightening records, the city reduces the margin for error at precisely the moment when margin of supply is narrowing. A stack of older grain sacks is moved from the rear of the granary toward the front loading area. Chalk markings showing the month of delivery are checked against ledger entries. The oldest stock is scheduled for milling first. This movement follows a deliberate rotation plan designed to prevent hidden loss within reserve totals. Grain does not remain stable indefinitely. Moisture infiltration, insect activity, and gradual nutrient degradation reduce usable quality over time. Storage rotation converts aging stock into immediate consumption while preserving newer deliveries for later use. The objective is to maintain consistent quality and prevent sudden discovery of unusable reserves during critical periods. Each storage row is labeled with date, origin village, and initial inspection condition. Inspectors perform periodic physical checks, opening selected sacks to examine texture and odor. When early signs of spoilage appear, affected sacks are isolated. Isolation prevents contamination of adjacent stock. The volume removed from reserve totals is documented immediately. Ventilation control is central to preservation. Granary windows are opened during dry weather to reduce humidity and closed during rain. Raised wooden pallets prevent sacks from resting directly on stone floors where condensation accumulates. Lime may be applied to interior walls to reduce dampness. These environmental controls extend shelf life and protect calculated endurance projections. Rodent deterrence is inspected, traps are set at perimeter walls, entry points are sealed. Grain loss through pests may appear minor daily, but compounds across weeks. Loss is measured in both weight and contamination risk. Preventing pest intrusion preserves both volume and safety. Salted and preserved foods undergo similar rotation. Barrels of salted meat are opened and examined for brine clarity. If brine weakens, additional salt may be added to maintain preservation. Dried legumes are checked for insect infestation. Root vegetables stored in cool cellars are inspected for rot. Items nearing spoilage are prioritized for distribution to avoid waste. Spoilage thresholds are defined. For example, if moisture content exceeds a certain level detectable by touch and appearance, that batch is either dried or removed. These thresholds are recorded to maintain consistency across inspections. Clear criteria prevent arbitrary decisions that could distort reserve assessment. Milling coordination supports rotation. Millers receive directives specifying which grain batches to process. By controlling the sequence of milling, officials ensure that older stock exits storage before deterioration accelerates. Milling records note batch origin, enabling traceability if quality issues arise in finished flour. Emergency reserves remain sealed during routine rotation unless their age approaches the risk threshold. In such cases, emergency stock may be cycled into regular distribution and replaced with newer grain if available. This controlled exchange maintains emergency capacity without allowing it to degrade unnoticed. Moisture measurement methods include tactile assessment and observation of sack weight changes. Increased weight without corresponding ledger entry may indicate absorbed humidity. Such sacks are dried in controlled conditions before re-entry into storage. Drying areas are supervised to prevent theft or misplacement during handling. Fire risk is evaluated in storage areas. Accumulated dust increases combustion risk. Regular sweeping reduces hazards. Fire would destroy reserves instantly and negate careful planning. Therefore, preventive cleaning forms part of spoilage prevention. You observe that rotation transforms storage from static accumulation into managed flow. Each movement is recorded. Each batch's condition is reassessed periodically. The reserve map from Section 2 is dynamic, not fixed. Rotation preserves the accuracy of that map. During shortage strain, rotation frequency increases. Inspectors review stacks more often. The cost of undetected spoilage rises as overall margin narrows. By intensifying rotation discipline, the city protects every unit of stored food as a strategic asset. The system integrates physical inspection, environmental management, milling coordination, and documentation. No sack remains untouched beyond its safe interval. Preservation is achieved through active oversight rather than assumption. Storage becomes a controlled sequence rather than a warehouse of forgotten goods. A heavy wooden door closes against the stone frame of a civic granary. An iron lock engages. The key is removed and its custody recorded in a ledger beside the name of the official responsible for the next access period. Supply protection begins with controlled entry. Security during shortage strain focuses on prevention, documentation, and deterrence. Access to storage facilities is limited to authorized personnel whose names are listed in municipal records. Each entry into the granary is logged with date, time, and purpose. This log allows review of patterns that might indicate irregular activity. Key management is centralized. Duplicate keys are sealed in containers bearing official wax impressions. Breaking a seal requires notation in the ledger. Keys are not carried casually between locations. Transfer of custody requires signature and witness notation. This protocol prevents unauthorized duplication or misuse. Night watch rotations increase around storage sites. Watchmen are assigned fixed intervals and patrol routes. Their presence is visible but not confrontational. The objective is deterrence rather than suppression. Regular patrol timing reduces opportunity for covert removal of goods. Granary windows and ventilation openings are fitted with bars or secured covers. Structural vulnerabilities are inspected. Cracks or loose boards that could allow discreet entry are repaired promptly. Physical integrity complements administrative control. Warehouse layout is arranged to minimize blind corners. Clear lines of sight allow watch personnel to monitor interior movement. Lighting, whether from torches or lanterns, is positioned to illuminate entry points without creating excessive fire risk. Fire protocols are established to prevent accidental ignition during patrol. Monastic and guild storage facilities coordinate with civic authorities. Shared information about stock levels and security measures reduces disparity between sites that could attract targeted theft. Unified standards across institutions prevent weakest link exploitation. Penalty frameworks are documented in advance. Theft during shortage carries defined consequences. Public knowledge of these penalties reinforces deterrence. However, enforcement remains procedural rather than theatrical. Arrests, when necessary, follow established legal processes. Transportation of grain between storage and distribution points is supervised. Carts are counted before departure and upon arrival. Seals placed on wagon covers are inspected for tampering. Discrepancies trigger immediate recount before acceptance at destination. Rumor monitoring forms part of guarding strategy. Officials remain attentive to reports of planned hoarding or coordinated theft. Information flows through parish networks and guild leaders. Early awareness allows reinforcement of vulnerable sites before incidents occur. Inventory audits complement physical guarding. Periodic recounts verify that recorded totals match physical stock. Even minor discrepancies are traced. Continuous verification reduces cumulative loss that might otherwise go unnoticed. You observe that guarding the supply does not rely solely on force, it relies on structure. Clear protocols for access, documentation of custody, coordinated patrol, and rapid reconciliation of inventory create a secure environment. Visible order discourages opportunistic behavior. Security also protects against internal error. Clear logs prevent mistaken double issuance or accidental misplacement. Guarding, therefore, extends beyond theft prevention to preservation of accurate accounting. During strain, the value of each sack increases. As margin narrows, incentive for unauthorized acquisition rises. By strengthening physical and administrative security simultaneously, the city ensures that reserve calculations remain valid. Protection preserves the integrity of rationing frameworks and market stabilization measures already in place. Supply guarding integrates with all prior sections. Without secure storage, rotation fails. Without accurate inventory, rationing collapses. Security becomes the stabilizing perimeter around the reserve system. A miller adjusts the hopper above the millstone. Instead of pouring pure wheat into the grinding chamber, he adds a measured portion of barley and a smaller amount of dried legumes. The mixture is recorded by ratio in a production ledger. This adjustment does not signal desperation. It reflects a controlled recalibration of ingredients designed to extend primary grain reserves. Substitution begins with nutritional assessment. Wheat provides structure and caloric density, but barley, rye, oats, and ground legumes contribute complementary energy and protein. Officials evaluate existing stock of alternative grains and preserved plant foods identified during reserve surveys. Quantities are calculated in relation to wheat reserves to determine sustainable blending percentages. Blend ratios are standardized to preserve consistency. For example, a loaf may contain a fixed proportion of wheat to barley. Bakers receive written instructions detailing the approved mixture. This prevents arbitrary experimentation that could undermine quality or distort ration projections. Each batch produced under substitution guidelines is logged with date and ratio. Milling adjustments follow mechanical considerations. Different grains require varied grinding pressure and stone spacing. Millers recalibrate stone distance to achieve uniform flour texture. Excessively coarse flour reduces digestibility. Excessively fine flour increases waste during sifting. Mechanical settings are recorded to ensure reproducibility. Legume incorporation requires additional processing. Dried peas or beans are soaked, dried again, and milled to reduce hardness. Their inclusion extends caloric yield per sack of wheat by reducing the amount of wheat required per loaf. The ledger records total wheat displaced by substitute volume. This displacement calculation feeds back into endurance projections. Baking schedules adapt to new mixtures. Blended dough behaves differently during fermentation. Bakers adjust proofing time and oven temperature to maintain loaf integrity. Fuel consumption may decrease if baking cycles shorten due to reduced loaf size. Wood use is recorded to prevent fuel shortage from emerging alongside food strain. Market communication aligns with substitution implementation. Loaves may retain regulated weight while composition changes. Weight compliance ensures fairness. Composition changes are authorized and recorded. Transparency within guild structure maintains trust among bakers and officials. Alternative food sources supplement bread ration. Root vegetables stored in cellars are encouraged for greater household use. Salted meats and preserved fish are distributed strategically to reduce grain dependence. These supplements are factored into ration calculations to maintain caloric adequacy. Foraging guidance may be issued quietly through parish networks. Edible greens and seasonal plants augment urban diets when available. These measures are not presented as emergency improvisation but as structured extension of supply. Industrial processes adapt as well. Brewers reduce grain allocation for ale production. Dye workshops adjust schedules to limit fuel and water use. By moderating non-essential consumption of grain and water, substitution systems protect primary food supply. Monitoring a company's adaptation, officials track flour yield per sack after blending. If milling loss increases due to substitution, ratios are adjusted. Quality inspections ensure that nutritional value remains sufficient to sustain labor capacity across the population. Substitution planning also anticipates recovery. When new harvests arrive, blending ratios may gradually return to higher wheat content. This transition is documented to prevent abrupt shift that would distort consumption projections. You observe that adaptation operates through deliberate engineering rather than improvisation. Each change is measured, recorded, and reviewed. Substitution extends reserves not through concealment but through calculated redistribution of nutritional inputs. This system integrates milling technology, baking science, reserve arithmetic, and demographic needs. By diversifying the grain base and aligning production methods with adjusted supply, the city prolongs endurance without destabilizing market structure. New harvest carts enter the city gate under supervision. Grain sacks are unloaded and weighed before storage assignment. The ledger that previously tracked depletion now begins to record replenishment. Restoration does not erase prior strain. It rebuilds margin gradually through structured accumulation. Reserve rebuilding begins with reassessment. Officials compare actual depletion during the shortage period with projected models calculated earlier. Variance between projected and actual consumption is analyzed. If rationing extended reserves longer than expected, formulas are refined for future use. If spoilage exceeds estimates, storage protocols are revised. Incoming grain is allocated first to replenish emergency reserves rather than expand market flow immediately. Civic granaries are refilled to predefined threshold levels. Only after emergency stock reaches target volume does unrestricted trade resume. This sequencing prevents rapid return to vulnerability. Ledger columns are updated to reflect restored endurance capacity. New harvest totals are entered beside prior shortage records. Margin calculations are recalculated using updated population data. Officials evaluate whether population shifted during strain due to migration or mortality and adjust planning assumptions accordingly. Infrastructure maintenance receives renewed attention. Granary repairs deferred during active shortage are completed. Cistern sediment removed during strain is replaced with cleaned lining if needed. Aqueduct inspections are scheduled to confirm structural integrity. Restoration strengthens physical systems alongside stock levels. Rationing frameworks are reviewed but not immediately discarded. Officials retain prepared distribution charts and token templates for future use. Documentation from the shortage period is archived in municipal records as reference. Lessons learned become institutional memory. Market regulations gradually relax in measured increments. Export restrictions are lifted only after reserve thresholds are secure. Weight and price inspections continue at normal frequency rather than at an intensified rate. Stability remains a priority even during recovery. Substitution ratios revert progressively. Wheat proportion increases as stock allows. Bakers adjust milling settings back to standard configuration. Monitoring ensures that abrupt change does not create waste or imbalance in remaining substitute grain. Emergency planning documents are annotated with observed outcomes. For example, if ration reduction of 10% proved sufficient to extend supply by a defined duration, that figure is recorded as a benchmark. These annotations guide future decision-making without requiring rediscovery under pressure. Financial records are reconciled. Expenditures related to inspection, guarding, and administrative intensification are tallied. Budget allocations for reserve rebuilding are approved based on accurate accounting. Fiscal planning supports continued preparedness. Coordination between civic and monastic storage systems is reaffirmed. Joint audits confirm combined capacity meets or exceeds pre-shortage levels. Agreements governing shared responses are updated if weaknesses are identified. You observe that restoration is not celebration. It is recalibration. The city does not assume that future harvests will remain abundant. Instead, it restores the buffer. Buffer represents time. Time allows a calm response when signals shift again. The system completes its cycle by integrating experience into structure. Records from early signal detection through ration implementation and substitution are preserved. These records transform one episode of strain into durable administrative knowledge. Preparedness becomes policy rather than reaction. By rebuilding reserves deliberately, maintaining documentation, and preserving refined procedures, the city ensures that the next deviation in harvest totals or well depth will meet a system already trained by experience. The cycle of preparation closes where it began, in a ledger updated with accurate numbers and strengthened protocols. You have observed how a medieval city prepares for shortage without spectacle. Signals are read before they are felt. Reserves are counted in weight and in time. Water is measured against stone marks. Markets are stabilized through calibrated oversight. Rations are structured according to function. Records tighten as margin narrows. Storage is rotated to prevent silent loss. Supply is guarded through documented custody. Substitutions extend endurance without disorder, and when pressure passes, reserves are rebuilt before confidence returns. There is no urgency. Survival rests on measurement, documentation, and disciplined adjustment. The system holds because it is observed. If this examination of quiet preparedness has clarified how cities endured strain, consider returning to the archive for further studies in structural history.